In this video, we're going to be discussing the destination page. Now, this page is used to add or edit existing steer points. Now, under the destination page are two subpages, and those are used for adding offset aim points to a particular steer point. Now, those we're going to be covering in great detail a little bit later on. For now, we're going to be focusing on just the destination main page. Now, the destination page isn't the only place where you can add or edit steer point data. As shown in the illustration here, both the destination page and the steer point page both have the same information, and rightfully so, because they both deal with the same data. Now, that raises the question, if you can add or modify steer point data on the steer point page, then what's the need to have a destination page? The answer to that question is when you add or modify steer point data on the steer point page, it changes the active steer point on the airplane. Whereas if you change that data on the destination page, it does not. So let's illustrate that. In this example, we have both HUD images displaying the exact same thing, that we are 27 miles out of steer point 4. On both sides, we have a DED page. On the left is the destination page, and on the right is the steer point page. And for now, we are going to focus on the right side. So, what we have displayed here is an impossible scenario. We have the steer point page reflecting steer point 1 being selected, and we have the HUD showing that we are referencing steer 4. Now, what makes this impossible is the active steer point is always what's going to be reflected in the steer point DED page. In other words, if you want to modify steer point 8 data, when you change the steer point on your DED page to 8, it's going to change your active steer point to 8. So this isn't really the preferred nor an attractive option to use while in the air. What'll happen is you'll have a bunch of active steer points being cycled across your HUD while you're changing your steer point in your DED page. And once you're done, you just cycle back to the original steer point, and that's if you remember the steer point that you were referencing originally. So instead of dealing with all of that, we use the destination page. Now we are focusing on the left side. And here it is possible to change the steer point in your DED page and modify any steer point without changing the active steer point on your airplane. And that, basically in a nutshell, is what the destination page is, as well as the difference between it and the steer point page. And of course, we'll be doing a demonstration of using the destination page while in the pit later on in the video. Now we're going to go slightly off topic here since we're discussing adding or modifying steer points. For those of you who are familiar with Weapon Delivery Planner, you're going to recognize the data card displayed here. Now the reason why it's being brought up here is to stress the importance of being aware of your steer points or your flight plan in general. It's just really handy to have the information next to you, whether it be an iPad or a laptop within arm's reach or even printed out. Because really, in the case of adding steer points, you want to know what is the last steer point within your flight plan instead of doing the guesswork in the air, or worse, accidentally overriding a steer point. So as an example, let's say you're doing close air support mission and you have a forward air controller and they're not sending you a mark point. You can glance down at your data card, know what the last steer point is for your flight plan, go right straight to the next one and have it right there and available to punch in the grid without having, again, any guesswork while in the air. Now, let's say you don't have the luxury of having an iPad or a laptop next to you, or even tons of ink floating around in your closet. You could use the data card on the previous slide, kind of blow it up a little bit, get it printed out nice and laminated, or you can use this option here. Now, she isn't the prettiest girl at the ball, but she'll certainly get the job done. This data card is found in the original Falcon manual on page D2. The size of it is not going to really help you out much coming from that manual. So linked down below in the comments is a download of this legacy data card in PDF format, and it's been stretched to full sheet 8.5 by 11. So what you can basically do with it is either laminate it or even slip it in a document protector. and use a fine tip wet erase marker, and there you go. Alright, this is a non-pit demonstration regarding steer points, and a very, very important point is going to be covered here. So let's look and see what we have in front of us. Looks like we have a map and a flight plan and a bunch of steer points and lines connecting them all. For this particular flight plan, we start at Andersen Air Force Base, our steer point 1 being here. Our steer point 2 takes us out here. 110 miles away is our steer point 3, 4, 5 is here, our target area at Saipan International Airport. 6 takes us down south of Rota, and 7 takes us back to Andersen Air Force Base. Now, at a quick glance, I mean, that's all the lines you see. So this is our flight plan, right? Well, let's look at our flight plan. And let's go to number 7. Number 7, as was just stated earlier, number 7 takes us back to Andersen Air Force Base. But if you look up here, you'll see another next, you'll see a next arrow, meaning we have an additional steer point. This one takes us to Naval Air Station Guam. Well, what is Naval Air Station Guam, and what's it doing on our flight plan? Naval Air Station Guam. What the game does, I didn't add this, what the game does is it automatically tacks on an additional steer point at the end of your flight plan. Now, it's, especially if you're new to this, it's really easy to overlook because there's no line connecting it. So if you are manually setting up your data card, this is extremely important. Don't get fixated on the lines. Your flight plan actually has, well, your flight plan is this, but in regards to steer points, you have one more than your destination, being your alternate airfield. Now, another point to bring up too is in regards to adding steer points, if you get fixated on the 7 and you add a steer point and add it to number 8, you are going to overwrite your alternate airfield. And all things bad, well, when it gets bad, all things bad will happen if you overwrite that. You got to go to your book, look it up, yada yada. Right? You don't want to do that. Make sure that you're aware whenever you're setting up your manual data card that you include your alternate airfield as the last steer point. So in this case, for this particular flight, if you were going to add a steer point, you would make it steer point 9. So with all of that said, the key point here is information in hand. Know your steer points. And equally important is preparing for the worst and knowing where information is. In this image in the bottom right corner is the navigation Korea volume made by Red Dog. And what it contains is airfield data for the Korean theater. So it behooves you to get this if you don't have it already, or if you might be flying other theaters, you want to grab the information for the airports for those as well. And a link to Red Dog's download page for this particular publication is also listed in comments. Okay, quick recap. We know what a destination page is. We know the difference between a destination page and a steer point page. And we understand the importance of being aware of our steer points. So here we are going to discuss how to get to our destination page. Again, the ICP image is borrowed from Red Dog's -1. And we have the CNI page there on the DED. So on the ICP, we push the list button to access the list page on the DED. And here on the DED, we note the top left corner where it states 1 DEST. So on the ICP, we push the 1 button. And here we are on the destination page. Now, to change the steer point number, we can simply punch in the steer point number in the edit field and push enter, which will automatically change it to it. Or we can cycle through the numbers by using the rocker switch on the bottom left-hand corner of the ICP. Now, be aware when you're on the destination page, let's say, for example, your airplane is referencing steer point 4, but you're editing steer point 8. Now, you come up on your turn to steer point 5, and you push up on your rocker switch to, of course, make your active steer point 5. It is not going to change your active steer point. While on the destination page, it's going to move your steer point from what you're editing, being steer point 8, to steer point 9. So remember that rocker switch cycles the steer points on the destination page. Alright, so now we are in the pit to discuss the destination page. First off, I am using the Guam Theater for this particular video. It was just released a couple days ago. It's alpha, but it's still pretty dang nice. Let's get a zoom. And sorry for the back and forth. My slider does that. Pepsi. I see a lot of this building. They must really like Pepsi in Guam. Anyway, back to business. Destination page. To access it, we push list. Then on the DED 1 DEST, we push 1, and there we are. Okay, now once again, if we look on the DED, it shows us referencing steer 1 on this page. Our active steer point on our airplane is steer point 3. If we go back to, let's return, if we go to our steer page, once again, steer point 3, active steer point is 3. If we use the rocker switch and go up once, it takes us to steer point 4, active steer point is 4. So once again, this is not the preferred method to edit and or add steer points. Okay, so we are going to add a steer point. So list 1 and then destination page. Now we are going to be using steer point 10. So I go to 10 and push enter. Now to save on a little bit of very slow clicking that I do, I went ahead and entered the coordinates that we'll say a forward air controller gave me. So I went ahead and edited these two lines here, and what it gave me was a steer point. I can change this or use the rocker right there, and that's it. Now if you wanted to edit, once again, really easy. List destination, just move it down and then just start punching away here, like 3, 5, yada yada, so on and so forth. Really easy stuff. Now we'll move into the sub pages. Offset aim points. Now what they do is they add 1 or 2 little triangles in your HUD, as you can see in that image. Now you can use these in a number of different ways, but primarily what they do is they give you a visual reference when you need to follow a precision heading. And their location is based off of a selected or specific steer point. And the concept of offset endpoints is simply fly a straight line. Now what we're looking at here is a side view of a steer point and 2 offset aim points. So basically, imagine you're in a plane and you're following the black arrow, and that's it. Now an example of where offset aim points would be handy that again require precision heading is when you're doing a runway strike. You would start with your steer point being on the runway. You set an offset aim point on one and the other side, and you basically just follow the cues. Now let's talk briefly how to get there. Basically from the destination page, which we've already covered, push the sequence on the DCS, and what it'll do is it'll cycle you to the destination OA1 page, push it again to the OA2. Push it a third time, it'll take you back to the destination page. So you can keep pushing sequence on your DCS and it'll just cycle you between the 3 pages. Now to the meat of these pages. On both page OA1 and OA2 there are 3 lines: range, bearing, and elevation. Now we'll cover the information for those 3 lines here shortly, but the important point to take away from this slide is that the range, bearing, and elevation, everything is based off of the steer point. Now things might be a little foggy right now, but believe me, within these next couple of slides you're going to see how everything ties to that steer point. Now let's talk about the first line, range. Now if you look at that DED page there in the middle, you'll see that the range is based off of feet. Glance upward to the image at the top and you'll see that there is 6,076.12 feet in a nautical mile. And what I've done on the DED is I've simplified it and made it 6,000. You know, I'm not looking for precision as far as the placement for the distance or the range. with this particular page. I am looking for precision, of course, on the steer point, but this is really up to you. If you want to put it at 12,000 for 2 nautical miles out, or if you fancy 18,000 for 3 nautical miles, that's fine. It's entirely what works for you. And if we look at the bottom image, we'll see that the triangle being OA1 marker is what we entered in the DED, 6,000 feet away from the steer point, the diamond. Again, everything is based off of the steer point. Now that we have our range set and we hit enter on the ICP, that takes us down to our bearing line. Now what the bearing is the heading to or away from the steer point, depending on how you want to look at it. Now the way this is set up is normally you are going to have that either being the heading that you're flying to your steer point or away from your steer point. Now remember, this isn't like doing a pop-up. This is being used for alignment. This isn't a turning cue or a pull-up cue or any of that stuff. Basically, you're going to have that triangle line up with the diamond, then another triangle if you use a second one. So again, it's going to be the bearing either to or from that particular steer point. And yet again, everything is based off of the steer point. Now, a quick note concerning bearing. If you are going to put an offset aim point due north of a steer point, put it at 0 or just leave it alone. Chances are it's probably going to already be defaulted to 0. If you try and use 360, it's going to flash at you and it's not going to like it very much. So use 0 for due north. Now, once you have the bearing set and hit enter, it'll take you down to the elevation. Now, elevation is the height above the steer point. Once again, I got to reiterate this, everything is based off the steer point. Look at that caption there to the right. If the steer point elevation is 1,000 feet and the offset aim point is set to 5,000 feet, the actual elevation of that offset aim point is going to be 6,000 feet. 5,000 feet, what you entered above the steer point. Now, I'm not going to take you through pretty much explaining the exact same thing for OA2. The pages are exactly the same because really all OA2 is a second marker. Okay, so the key note here is looking at those two DED pages, the one on the left, OA1, if you look at the bearing, it's at 270 degrees. If you look at the DED page on the right, OA2, the bearing is in the opposite direction, 90 degrees. And what we did when we set those two values is basically line those two triangles up. Now this next slide is going to pretty much put everything that we've talked about concerning offset aim points together. Now what we have here is a whole lot of information. For now, ignore everything except for that runway. Now on the left side of the runway, we have a runway heading of 09 or 90 degrees due east. On the right side of that runway, we have a runway heading of 27 or 270 degrees due west. And in between, in the middle of the runway, we have a diamond symbolizing a steer point. Now, with that information alone, we have enough data to start punching in values in our offset aim point subpages. So let's look and see what we have. First, we have a base of everything being that steer point. We also have elevation. Whenever a steer point is put on the map, it is put at the elevation of that particular location. So we have a base, that steer point, and we have elevation. So let's start filling out those offset aim pages. On the left side, offset aim page 1. We are going to be using just under a 1 nautical mile distance from that steer point, so our range is going to be 6,000 feet. Since heading 270 is from right to left, and we're putting that offset on the left side of that runway, we're going to enter 270 degrees. For the elevation, we're going to go ahead and leave that at 0. Now on the right side, for the range, we want the same that we put for offset aim number 1, just under 1 nautical mile. So we are going to enter 6,000 feet from the steer point to that offset aim point. For the bearing, remember, heading 090 is due east, left to right. So since that offset aim point is going to be on the right side, we are going to enter a bearing of 90 degrees. And once again, the elevation is going to be 0. Now remember, everything is set based off of the location of that steer point. So for elevation, for pages 1 and 2 being set at 0, they are going to be set and appear in your HUD at the same elevation of that steer point. Okay, so what we have now is if we wanted to attack this runway, we have visual cues both from the steer point and from the offset aim points, to where if we were going to attack it from either the west or from the east, we would have those visual cues within our HUD to fine-tune our lineup or our heading to hit that runway. Alright, now offset aim points do have limitations. Primarily, in order to see offset aim points on your HUD, you either have to be in nav master mode or you need to be in CCRP. Offset aim points do not display while you're in either air-to-air master mode, in CCIP, or in DTOS. Now for an example, and we're going to use the previous slide scenario. Let's say you're doing a low-level bombing run on that runway and your mode of delivery is going to be CCIP. Now because you're using CCIP, does that necessarily mean that you cannot take advantage of the offset aim points? Well, sure you can. You can use nav master mode or CCRP to do your lineup. And to do that is basically just switch between nav and air to ground master mode. Air to ground master mode should already be set for CCIP, or switch from CCRP to CCIP using your missile step button, the same button you use to engage or disengage nose wheel steering. Now where those would come in handy is if you're doing a nap of the earth run. If you have a mountain between you and the target area, when you go and turn in, you obviously can't visually see the target area yet, so you can switch over to nav or CCRP, again, what have you, do your adjustment, then switch back to CCIP, and then drop your bombs. So while there are limitations to using offset aim points, there are means to where you can use them while using different delivery methods, at least in the beginning of that particular run, to help you complete that mission. And here we are finally in the pit. Okay, we are using Guam Theater again. I'm currently over Tinian, and we're looking at Saipan and referencing Steer 4, which is our target area, Saipan International. Now, we want to set up some offset aim points. So, as previously discussed, we go into List, and we push 1 for Destination, and we push Sequence. Once again, if we push Sequence, it'll cycle us between the main destination page and offset aim 1, offset aim 2. Okay, so while we're here, we make sure that our target steer point is what's being set up here. So we rock her up to 4. Alright, now for the first one, we are going to use 6,000 again. And you notice nothing appeared there. And we set up the bearing. Now the heading is 07 and 25 for the runway. So we add a 0, 7, 0. Notice the decimal mark there. We add an additional 0. So now our bearing is 70, and we'll leave our elevation at 0. We push enter and watch the HUD. There is our offset aim point on that side. Now we push sequence because we're going to add a second one, 6,000 again, and this time runway 25, so 250 and an additional 0 because of the decimal mark, and we push enter. There's our second one. Now in theory what we would do is we certainly wouldn't be at 10,000 feet, but we would be lower, and we basically just maneuver to line up from where we're coming from with those two diamonds and those two triangles and that steer point diamond basically overlapping each other. And this is what it looks like when it's down low at about 1,200 feet. Okay, this close triangle here, this offset aim point, once that's centered with that far one, it's automatically going to center on that steer point. Again, that's being the base of everything. We put our flight path marker right there on the center of that steer point, and we have a nice precision heading from this to the steer point to the other. And really that's it. If we just We just turn, put our flight path marker there, or thereabouts, obviously higher, so you're not running it right into the ground. See, we're a little off here, but that's okay. Now as you get closer, obviously the gap between the two are going to get larger, but basically we're pretty much almost dead on here. So, and don't mind the offset. My settings for the bearings weren't precision. As you'll see when we fly over, the tiles aren't set, so it was just a guess on my part. And that's pretty much it. You line those up, you come in, you do your run, boom, 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 and easy peasy. Now, this is a side note for those who feel that 2 offset aim points are a little too cluttered for their HUD, and that's fine, and they prefer only using 1. We have our steer point right here, we have an offset aim point right there, and our other one is off over there off of our HUD. Now, when you go in for your run, or when you turn to the target area, you're using your HSI. This arrow obviously points to the target area or steer point, and this is the heading that you want to be on. If the arrow is to the right, you turn to the right. Arrow is to the left, obviously the opposite, you turn to the left. Well, using an offset aim point is no different, and this would be my personal suggestion, is if you are only going to use one, use one on the run-in side of your target area. In other words, don't use one on the far side. Reason being is go with what you know. This arrow is to the right, you turn to the right to straighten it up. This is no different. This is off to the right, so you need to turn to the right to straighten it up. So it keeps consistency between your HSI and this. So you're not doing, oh, it's off to the left, turn to the right, do the opposite. You don't need to deal with that confusion. Just stick with what you know. If it's off to the right, turn to the right.